Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Mental Health Talk with yours truly. I am Christina McIntyre. I hope that y'all week was as good as it could be. If it was some things that happened, let's not worry about it. Today is a new day. And just let's focus on creating our future now, or our reality now and into the future. If we can't change things, we don't need to worry about it. We can only change those things that we have control over. Um, don't forget to visit my website, www.becomeyourseed.com, where I talk about the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects of ourselves to help unveil our true identity. Also, follow me on Instagram, Become Your C, Facebook, BYC, Become Your C, YouTube, BYC, Become Your C, and I'm also on TikTok at Become Your C. So, this week I wanted to talk about trauma because I've been having conversations with a lot of people, and a lot of people have suffered from trauma, and it definitely affects our life. And I want to share with people ways that they can, first, you have to recognize it, and then ways that you can heal and then live on your life. Trauma affects people in different ways, and just finding where it comes from can definitely help resolve some issues. And if you're ever at a point where you feel like you're suicidal because of all the pain that you're suffering from, please don't use that as an option. I know people do because they feel like that's their last resort, but there is help out there. The suicide hotline is 800-273-8255, or you can visit them online, suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Don't let that be your last solution. I know sometimes pain can seem overwhelming. You just need a way out, but there are solutions. You owe it to yourself to live your life the best that it can, and you can't do that if you're not here. So please don't use that as the last solution. Please know that people are there to help you, and then definitely help yourself. So trauma is one of those things, right? A lot of times, a lot of people actually suffer from trauma. From research that I found, 60 to 70%, 75% of adults suffer from some type of trauma in their lifetime, which is an extremely large amount. I'm going to give a brief definition of what trauma is. Trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, emotional shocks from following a stressful event or a physical injury, which may be associated with physical shock and sometimes lead to long-term neurosis. And neurosis is a mild mental illness that is not caused by organic disease, involving symptoms of stress, depression, anxiety, obsessive behavior, hyperchronia, irrational anxiety, or obsession. So there are different types of trauma, and yes, some trauma can stem from having a physical illness. So definitely pay attention to your body. You know who you are. If you're suffering from an illness and you don't feel the same after, let's say you have surgery or something like that, definitely talk to your doctor so that you can get yourself back on track. There are 4 different types of trauma, and then there's also a subcategory of trauma. So the first is acute. So acute trauma is a result from a single stressful or dangerous event. So it's something that happened one time, but it has caused you pain. Chronic chronic trauma is from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events like bullying, abuse, domestic violence. Some types of addiction can cause chronic trauma. Complex trauma is results from exposure to multiple traumatic events. So someone that maybe has been abused, but also was bullied, or they were isolated from, and stuff like that. So pay attention to those. And then they have something called vicarious trauma, which is secondary. It's when a person develops trauma symptoms from someone that is close to them. So if you know someone that has suffered from trauma, you yourself also can suffer too, just by being in their presence, right? I believe in transfer of energy. So if someone is in pain and suffering, if you're that type of person that feeds off of energy, you can also experience same symptoms as well. That's why it's important to find root cause of our trauma. That way we can deal with it. That way we're not transferring the negative energy. I know that it's tough. A lot of people do not want to talk about trauma because it can be painful depending on what type of trauma it is. You don't want people to know certain things happen to you, but sharing your story is also what brings you strength, right? Letting it out also starts the healing process. So in order for you to heal, you have to share your story, speak it. I found that sharing your story also can touch a lot of people. People may be in the same situation as you, and by you sharing your story, you can actually help save someone. And so by doing that, you also save yourself. And there are symptoms of people that have trauma. There are emotional and physical responses that people that have dealt with trauma go through. So denial is one of those first things. It didn't happen to us, right? So if we tell ourselves and we believe it enough, this didn't happen to us, because we don't want to accept it. And if we don't accept it, it's not real. But with trauma, no matter how much you try to bury it, subconsciously it's still there, and it will come out in some of the worst ways. Anger, fear, sadness, shame, confusion, anxiety, depression, guilt, hopelessness, irritability, difficult concentrating. That is an emotional response. The physicals are the headaches, digestive system, fatigue, racing heart, sweating, and feeling jumpy. So if any of this connects with you, definitely sit back and figure. I'm not saying force trauma on you. No one wants to force trauma, but if you have dealt with some things, and a lot of us carry trauma from childhood, right? Undealt with pain from childhood, and it could be like what we think as minor, right? It could be substantial to that person. So everybody's trauma is unique to them, and so we can't tell someone to just get over. We can't tell someone that their situation is not as bad as someone else's. Their pain is real to them, and so it's important that we understand that and not judge them based on those things that we go through. And a lot of time people hide trauma because of, let's say, a family situation. A lot of people have been physically abused by those people that's supposed to love them. And so what a lot of families do is push it under the rug, right? You hear about churches that abuse children. They just push it under the rug. They don't speak about it. They act like it doesn't exist. And so a lot of times what happens, the person that has been abused, and some people have been abused for multiple years, it just stays with them. And after a time, they feel like that they deserve that. And so they react. A lot of people turn to drugs and alcohol, sex, gambling. They find anything to ease the pain. But what happens is when you push something down farther enough, what happens? It explodes, right? And so these people can't have normal lives because of the pain that they've been carrying since childhood. And so we have to begin to heal. And then if we have children, pay attention to our children and recognize if there is something going on. Children can't express to us things that are going on because they don't have the vocabulary to do that yet. So talk with your children. Also protect them. Sometimes we let children go to a lot of different places, and it's not that we're overprotecting them. We're trying to prevent things from happening, because these things do happen, especially with sexual abuse. Sexual abuse happens in churches and programs, at family members' house, and it's okay that your child may be mad at you because they can't go over so-and-so's house. You have to explain to them things that can happen. And on their level, like they won't understand it on our level, but there's a way to talk to your children so that they will understand a little bit better. Also, those children that are adults now that didn't have someone to turn to, I feel for them, because that means that they had to suffer in silence all those years. And people do commit suicide from all this trauma, right? Trauma is not just sexual abuse either. Trauma could be physical abuse. A lot of children have been abused by their parents. Now, I do believe in discipline, but some parents use it in excess, right? They physically abuse their children to the point where they have bruises or black eyes. They throw things at them, and then they have to lie to their teacher about what's really going on. And some stuff gets swept under the rug. It's a lot of cases that you hear about children getting abused in their home. The one little boy that was kept in the cabinet for years and stuff, and then finally he wind up passing away from the abuse that he was getting from the mom's boyfriend. So a lot of things like this. So if you see something, please report it. We know the difference between a child that is being like, disciplined or then abused. If you see bruises on a child, that should not happen. Even as an adult, if you see an adult getting abused, I know it's different laws with adults, especially if you're in a relationship and you're physically getting abused. If you don't report it, there's nothing that, someone else can do because you're an adult now, and so it gets kind of tricky with that. But definitely pay attention to your surroundings, pay attention to things that happen. PTSD is one category that trauma is. PTSD is post-traumatic stress syndrome. So it comes from a lot of different things: undealt with trauma, things that could happen, people that have been raped, people that come back from war or in the military, people that let's say they've been abandoned. There are some stories about children that have been left and they had to fend for themselves, so they turned to the streets, and they started, let's say, selling drugs, or they started doing burglary just to survive. So there are a lot of things that can contribute to PTSD. 6.8% of people that have dealt with trauma develop PTSD. Childhood trauma, again, I talked about it briefly. Childhood trauma can affect us as an adult if it's not dealt with. And it's harder to deal with it as an adult because now you have to talk about those things that you kept buried, and that can be painful. Some things you don't never want to talk about again, but I believe that the more you speak about your pain, the less hurt that it hurts you, the less trauma will still be there, and then you'll be able to let it go eventually. But this definitely takes time, especially if it was years of trauma that you had to deal with. It's not going to be an overnight thing. A lot of times people have to go get help, and it's okay to go get help for those things that you're suffering from. No one is here to judge you. You might have to find a different way of healing, right? We turn to drugs and alcohol, sex, gambling, even food as a way to cope with our stress. But at the end of the day, once that fixation is dealt with, right, we're going to need another one. And so if we don't deal with the root cause, there never will be a resolution. So we're trying to find a way to get and alleviate some of this pain, because it's going to take time, especially if you have been suffering for a while. There is a couple of ways to deal with it, right? Treatment can look different for everyone. Everyone decides how they're going to get treatment. Some people do go to therapy, and I urge you to speak with your doctor or whoever is your healthcare provider, whatever insurance you have, and try to get the best therapy out there. Again, you may have to go around and find a couple of different people before you find one that connects with you, but definitely you don't have to keep carrying around this pain. The longer you carry it, the more that you suffer. They have cognitive behavior therapy, which is changing your thought process, right? Like I have a thing that I share with people. Just because the pain happened, it doesn't mean that it has to continue to happen to you. And I think that's how therapy works. They try to channel your thought process, give you a new way of thinking. That way, when stuff happens, it doesn't trigger you anymore. They have something called somatic therapy. Somatic, which is they put you in it's not a real life, but they kind of simulate the experience you had by putting you in a safe environment, but also putting you kind of through the trauma again, just so that you can kind of develop routines of how to deal with it. Also, touch therapy, which is kind of a form of what I do with my chakras, is Reiki healing touch, therapeutic touch therapy. Those ways of dealing with the pain internally. There are a lot of different ways that you can. Medication is also a way. If you feel like the pain is so severe that you're having trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating, just getting up every day, trying to navigate through life. If you're experiencing that, medication may be an option for you. Trauma, also self-care, right? So we have to kind of take control over it. A lot of things happen. I don't know what people have gone through, but one thing we have to do is we have to take back control over our life. The longer that we sit with undealt with trauma, the longer that it is going to take to heal. So once we take back control, once we recognize that that was trauma, then we can begin the healing process, and then you could get to live the life that you want. But we also have to recognize that it happened to us, and we don't have to continue to let this pain hurt us anymore. And by doing that is then recognizing it and then creating a plan to begin the healing process. And whatever that plan is for you, if it's therapy, if it's medication, if it's the holistic form of healing, whatever you have to do to heal, pick something and begin it. The longer that you wait, the more that you have to suffer. And you don't want to suffer any more than you have to. Life is hard in general, just dealing with every day-to-day task. Don't allow your past to continue to affect your present and your future. Trauma can also cause anxiety disorders. So, anxiety disorders, 27.8 million people suffer from anxiety each year. Eating disorders, 30 million suffer from eating disorders each year. Depression, 19.4 million people suffer from depression each year. PTSD, 7.7 million people suffer. Alcohol and drug abuse, 23.5 million each year. Borderline personality disorder, 3 million people. So, as you can see, undealt with trauma lead to mental health disorders. And so we want to create a place where we can live life as normal as possible, or as normal as it is to us as possible. And you can't do that if you don't deal with the trauma that you've been through. And I know that it's tough. You don't want to bring up things that happened in the past. A lot of times everybody talks about it's in the past, it doesn't deal with it, but you don't recognize stuff as a trigger until you're placed in a position. Like, I know for me, I was in an abusive relationship for almost 5 years. And at the beginning, I did not want anyone to be around me, right? If anyone got too close to me or touched me, I would like kind of pull back and jump back. And I had to recognize that that was a problem. And so I had to begin dealing with things myself and asking myself, why am I doing that? And it was fear that someone else was going to hurt me, fear that I wasn't in a safe place. And so I had to begin it. And it's not easy. I had to, one, forgive myself for allowing myself to be in a situation. And then I had to forgive the other person for doing that to me. And it sounds like a crazy idea. Like, why am I forgiving someone that did this to me? Because maybe they weren't in the right state of mind. I believe that forgiveness helps the person that wants to move forward. And then after all of that, all the forgiving, I had to recognize my part that I played in it. And I stayed longer than I was supposed to. But, when you're in a relationship you fall in love, you try to justify people's actions. And so that's what I did. I stayed longer than I was supposed to. So I suffered more than I had to. But I also learned a lesson out of all of that. It was through that relationship that I learned how to love on myself. And so every experience, it does seem detrimental. It does seem that it's overwhelming, but you have to kind of find the good out of anything, right? We're still here. We're not victims anymore. And that's one thing that I want to tell people. Like, when you take yourself out of victim mode and put yourself in the survivor mode, you gain strength. You gain strength by telling your story. For a long time, I didn't let anyone know. No one knew what type of situation I was in. It wasn't until I think last year that started telling my family about how bad the abuse was. My courage came from um, leaving, right? And my strength, me not wanting to put my son in a situation where he had to watch his mom getting abused. And so I found a way out, and luckily I was one of those women that did walk away, because a lot of times we stay in abusive situations and people don't get a chance to walk away. And so through that whole process, I learned a lot about, people and myself. And it did discourage me from trusting people for a little bit. But then it's not fair to carry my past with me. It's not fair to put that on someone else either. And it definitely is still a process. I am so much better off now than I was. And there's still some work to do. I still have work to do, but it takes consistency in order to heal totally from that. And it's up to you to decide when you want to begin the healing process, and how long you want to remain hurt. And I'm not forcing anyone or telling anyone like to just get over it, because you don't just get over pain. But if you want to live a better life, if you want a life without the hurt and the trauma and the disappointment, you have to start somewhere. It has to be some point where you have to let it go. And I know you held on for it for so long, it became a comfort, right? It became your what is it? I can't find the word, but it became what you were used to. And so your pain became your life. And so having life without it just doesn't seem real. But you have to kind of change your thought pattern. Sometimes you have to leave the environment that you place yourself in. And I know sometimes we can't do it, but you have to make a plan of what can make you better. What the decisions that you make have to put you in a position where you are healing. And if you're in a negative environment, sometimes you might have to leave everything and go somewhere so that you can become who you need to be for yourself. And it's definitely a scary thing, right? To start over, to begin fresh, to become who you meant to be. And through the changes, it does seem like it's not you anymore. These thought processes and but you were so used to doing one way for so long. It's going to take time to get used to it, but I definitely urge you to go get help. Don't sit there and suffer longer than you have to. Therapy does wonders for people. Medication does wonders for some people, and then holistic healing does wonders for some people. It definitely helped me see a new way of thinking and processing information. I know I tend to overreact. I tend to overthink. And so by learning myself, learning my triggers, learning what was and it's not now, put me in a better place in my life so that I can create the life I want. And that's what I want for anyone that is suffering through trauma, is that you can create the life that you want and you need, but you have to know that you're worthy and you deserve that, and you do deserve that. No matter what happened to you in your past, it doesn't have to continuously happen to you. You get to choose when your life starts, right? Let everything go and cry if you need to, be angry if you need to. It's all a process, but definitely start somewhere. Lifestyle can also make your trauma worse. And so look at what you're doing to yourself, right? We turn to, again, drugs and alcohol, sex, gambling, food as a way to cope. And you have to pay attention to what it's doing to you. Alcohol over time can abuse your body, so can drugs, so can food, so can gambling, so can sex. All of these can become an addiction. An addiction is something that you feel like you need to survive. And if you need it to survive, without it, you feel like there is no life. And so If you suffer from an addiction because of your trauma, you definitely need help if you want some normalcy. And you have to begin the process. I know trauma can be painful. I dealt with a lot of trauma since I was young. I lost a father. He actually got murdered when I was 10, and I have siblings as well. And so dealing with that and dealing with death after death. And then when I was 21, my aunt that raised me passed away from a heart attack. And so I had to deal with a lot of stuff, and I didn't deal with it, right? I just carried it on my shoulders because what we have to do is we have to function through life, right? We have to work. We got to take care of our kids and our household. We never give our time enough. We never give ourselves enough time to heal. And we all have to heal. We have to go through the grieving process. We have to sit in it for a while. And we don't have time. And this is what I don't like about the reality that we live in. Everything is so pressed on time. We have to be at work at a certain time. We have to do these things at a certain time. And that creates anxiety. I know certain jobs that I worked at, it's like you have to be, granted, things have to start at a certain time, but it creates this anxiety. And so people trying to rush you through your pain, right, through your trauma. It's like you need to hurry up and get over it. No, I don't have to hurry up and get over it. I can heal through it. And if someone loves you and if someone cares about you, they will go through it with you. They will go through the healing process with you. But people don't want to deal with your stuff, but they want you to help them deal with their stuff. And that is not a good support system. And that's one thing to have dealing with trauma. You need to have a good support system. You need to have someone that is willing to go through the ups and downs. And it is ups and downs, right? Trauma can not only hurt you, but it hurts those people around you, especially once you tell your story about what you've been through. People can feel that, and they'll feel bad for you. And so learning how to deal with it together can definitely help you overall. I want people to choose themselves first. Choose you. Choose you. Make sure you make yourself worthy and valuable enough, and know that you matter and that you deserve happiness no matter what you've been through. And I think a lot of us that have been through trauma don't think we deserve happiness, don't think that we deserve the life that we want, but we do, right? All those things that happen doesn't define who we are, doesn't define how our life should be. We choose how we want our life. We choose how we want to live. And in order to do that, we have to make amends with our past. And that's what hurts so bad, is we have to eventually let it go if we want that life that we desire. And a lot of us, we're not ready to let it go yet. But you have to, at some point, right, you want to live the best life that you can, and you can't do that with having baggage, right? We can't move forward carrying baggage. Imagine if you ever lost any amount of weight and put that on your back and try to carry it, right? Imagine that being your past, being your hurt, being your pain, being your trauma. You can't carry it forever. It's going to weigh you down. And so at some point, you have to let it go so that you can move forward, right? Life is heavy enough in itself. And so don't let I'm not going to say unnecessary, but don't let your trauma control you any longer. Today, decide that you want better for yourself. And even if you have to start on like Facebook, because that's where I started healing, talk to some people on there. Let it lead to talking to your doctor. Let it lead to you going to therapy. Let it lead to you developing a plan for your life so you can move forward. And sometimes you do have to change your environment. You got to change your friends. You got to change what you're doing. You have to change your way of thinking, and you got to love on yourself at every step of the way. Because just because all this stuff happened to you as a child, maybe you didn't get the parents that you wanted, maybe you didn't get the love that you needed, but you deserve it, and you deserve to know what that feels like, and it all starts with you. Love on yourself so much, or learn to love on yourself so much that you don't allow things to control you any longer. So that is it for today. I want to thank each and every one of y'all for tuning in. And also, I talked briefly about the chakra. Chakra is just our energies that we have in our body. And when things are out of balance, they create these physical problems for us. And that's where a lot of trauma begins. A lot of trauma begins in our root chakra. And our root chakra is our first chakra, is located at our pelvic area. And so if you want to learn more about this approach, you can always message me on Facebook, Christina McIntyre, BYC, Become Your C. I'll be happy to share how to go begin that process and also my experiences. I believe when we share with each other, we begin to heal more. You can find me www.becomeyourc.com. I talk about the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Also on Instagram, Become Your C. I share a lot of information and poetry on there as well. Facebook, BYC Become Your C, or Christina McIntyre, and also YouTube BYC Become Your C. Stay up to date on my latest posts. Again, I want to thank each and every one of y'all for tuning in. Until next time, make sure that you fall in love with yourself so the world can fall in love with you.